What separates the best Yu-Gi-Oh players from the rest of the pack? Is it their ability to always find the best deck to play in a metagame? Is it their deck building skills? Or maybe it's their ability to simply know how to read cards? While all these things are important and certainly give better players an edge, I believe that the biggest thing that sets them apart from everyone else is their technical play. So what is technical play and how can you improve the skills so you can get better at the game? I'm going to be going over 3 different things that you can start doing today in order to improve your overall performance at events and overall become a better and more consistent player. I of course just want to make it clear that I am by no means the best Yu-Gi-Oh player out there, and I still have a lot to improve on myself. That being said though, I've been playing this game competitively for many years now, and I wanted to share these 3 things that have helped me improve a lot from when I just started playing the game, because I'm sure that these will help you out as well, regardless of how much competitive experience you have. So without any further ado, let's get into it. The first tip I want to talk about is just playing the game more. Now this is going to sound obvious, but the more you play, the better you're going to get at the game. And that's because playing the game more and more puts you in different situations that you'll have to learn from and adapt to. So instead of just watching videos or just theorying in your head, I think it's super important to get in practice just so you can get actual experience against real players with whatever deck you choose to use. I think that playing online gives you the opportunity to not only try out different strategies that you don't necessarily have to commit to buying in real life, it also makes it so the games you play go a little bit faster and you can just get in more games overall. I'd recommend a manual simulator like Dueling Book, where it forces you to actually perform all the actions yourself if you're a bit of a more experienced player, because this more closely simulates the actual experience of playing in real life. Whereas if you're a bit of a newer player, I think using an automatic simulator like Omega could be pretty good, just so you don't have to worry about that many things and you can just focus on improving your gameplay and testing out the deck that you want to. So even though this is a really obvious tip, I just think that players don't put as much value on testing because of either their busy schedules or they feel like it's not that important. But I feel like even just 1 or 2 games a day can make it so that you not only keep up with the meta trends, but every game you play, you're getting more and more familiar with your own deck, but also the other decks in the metagame. So I think overall, this is probably the biggest step I have and probably the simplest one to implement. Just simply play the game more and gain more experience overall. If you don't have as much time to play games though, I think that it could also be beneficial to sort of just play solitaire. And I know that's going to sound a bit weird, but depending on the deck you're playing, maybe just practice playing through common interruptions or hand traps. In the modern game of Yu-Gi-Oh, these are pretty much everywhere, and pretty much every single deck will have to deal with these in one way or another. So I think that by simulating playing against an opponent when you're going first and assuming they have a couple of different disruptions, just simply draw hands from your deck and try to play out your turn as best as possible while your opponent will use those hand traps against you. Now it's really up to you how you choose to do this. You could just maybe assume your opponent is going to use their hand traps on the first thing that they see, or you can assume that your opponent's going to use the hand traps optimally and sort of see if you're able to structure your turn in a way that's able to beat them. But regardless of how you choose, I think that it's very beneficial to just get a better understanding of what to do in these situations when your opponent has these hand traps, because if you go to a tournament, you're likely going to run into these situations quite often when you play, no matter what deck you're playing. Something else that I think could also be beneficial is pretending to go second. And now this one is a little bit harder if you don't actually have an actual person to test with, but something you could do is go look up what the meta decks in the format are commonly putting up on their end boards and sort of see if you're able to deal with that with your deck. Like, you can draw a random hand of 6 cards and assume your opponent sets up the standard board that is the most common for their deck. Something you can do is see if you're able to play through it successfully and use this experience to highlight weaknesses in your deck building or just your sequencing overall. And while this isn't as good as getting in a real game, of course, since you will have full information on what both players have, I still think that this could be really beneficial if you just don't have that energy or time to actually play those games online. Before we get any further into the video, I just want to ask you guys to please check if you're subscribed to this channel. Most of the people watching my videos are not subscribed, and it would really mean a lot to me if you can just make sure that you are, because I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2024, and it would mean so much to me if you guys enjoy these types of videos and they help you out by just subscribing. It'll keep me motivated to keep making more videos like this, and I really appreciate it. But getting back into the video now, the next tip that I have is to just understand the metagame as a whole. You can certainly gain experience with the metagame by simply just playing a lot of games online, but I think that it's also important to do some research outside of the game. So things like watching videos on YouTube on things such as, like, what are the commonly played tech cards, what are the best upcoming decks, things like that. There are a lot of great resources out on YouTube at the moment where you can just simply learn more about the meta trends from these players who have played the game a lot and have a lot of experience in the current format and just in the game overall. This can not only help you with building your own decks if you're watching, for example, a tier list video on what the best tech cards are, but you can also know what the upcoming meta might look like by checking out meta tier lists to see what people are choosing to play in this format. Or maybe you can look ahead to the future and see what decks are slated to be the upcoming meta contenders. Being able to gain more exposure to the metagame as a whole and gaining a deeper understanding of what's commonly played as well as what's good in the format will definitely make you a stronger player no matter what deck you're playing and no matter what format you're in, because as the saying goes, knowledge is power. And the more you understand about the format, the better decisions you're able to make not only in the game but also outside of the game with things like deck building. On that note as well, I also want to mention it's important to understand what is quote-unquote standard in a deck. At the time of recording, Fire King Snake Eyes is one of the best decks of the format, and I want to show this list in particular as sort of like a example baseline of a quote-unquote standard deck. Now, the reason why I say this is important is because having knowledge on what is standard means when you're in an actual game, you have a better idea of what your opponent's deck might look like without having even seen their deck before. So as an example, if we assume that this deck list is this quote-unquote standard Fire King Snake Eyes deck, and whenever we play against Fire King Snake Eyes in the future, we'll roughly know the ratios of the cards that they should be playing as well. We can safely assume, for example, that most Snake Eyes decks are going to be on one copy of Snake Eyes Flamberge Dragon, which means it's a card that can be pretty vulnerable to removal like SP Little Knight, and using that kind of knowledge to structure your plays against this deck can be super beneficial. Similarly, something like Snake Eyes Oak being played at 1 could mean you focus more on getting rid of this card so your opponent won't have access to it for the rest of the game. So small things like that I think are only possible if you actually understand and know what the deck lists of the most commonly played decks out there are. And this will overall give you better information to play off of whenever you're playing in an actual game, because now you'll be able to make an educated guess on what your opponent may or may not have in their deck and structure your plays accordingly. So even though not every deck list is going to be the same, I think just understanding what is most commonly played will give you the best idea of what you need to play around when you play against these meta strategies. And the way I would suggest learning about these standard decks is to watch things like deck profiles online, or by simply just playing a bunch of games, you get a better idea of what most people are choosing to play and what sort of the standard ratios that people are choosing to play in these decks. And plus, if you are playing one of these decks yourself, it's also important to know what most people are choosing to play. These are decks that people have played a bunch of times and have sufficiently tested to where you don't necessarily have to do that yourself. So if you're maybe short on time or are new to a strategy, you can simply just take an existing deck and sort of make small adjustments to it as opposed to trying to build it from the ground up, because these players who have built these decks probably have a lot more experience than you would playing the deck as well as playing the format overall, and will have likely done some testing on their own to understand what the best choices for each deck are. So for the third and final tip that I wanted to give, I just wanted to talk about going over your own matches and seeing what you did incorrectly, what you did well, and to generally give yourself an idea of what areas you're still lacking in as a player. So here I have a replay of myself on Tenpai that I played a few weeks ago. I know that Tenpai probably isn't the best deck to use for this, but I only had replays of this deck because I was using it to test, so you're just gonna have to bear with me. Anyways, in this replay, I'm going to keep my opponent's hand hidden here because I think it's important as a player to be able to think about the different things your opponent could have. And even when reviewing a replay, I think it could be good just to give yourself more practice on like thinking through the lines as if you were currently playing a game against your opponent. So our opponent's going to kick things off, and they're going to start things off with a normal summon of Rescue Ace Airlifter. And here you see in my hand I only have a single copy of Ash Pulse and Joy Spring as my interaction on their turn. So then I have to consider whether I want to stop this or the card it searches. Now this is where your knowledge of what other meta decks do come in play, because if you know what a deck like Rescue Ace does, you know that this Airlifter is most likely either searching Emergency or one of the other quick play spells if they have Emergency, and using Ash on the Emergency is just going to be pretty much the same result because you're going to cut them off of getting a monster from their deck anyways. Now if they already have a copy of Emergency and you Ash Blossom this, then you just get heavily punished. So that's one way your knowledge of what this meta deck has access to is going to be able to help you out. So you can see why it's so important to have this knowledge before you get into a game, because now in this situation I know that I should never really hand trap this card, because if they have an extender they can play through the Ash Blossom anyways, but if this is their only starter, then stopping the emergency is the same result as stopping this. So we're going to see them go ahead and add a copy of alert, which is going to tell me that they have emergency in their hand, because if you just read alert, this is not going to do anything at the moment. And using our knowledge of what Rescue Ace does, we know that they would have just searched emergency if they didn't have access to it already. So this gives us some more information about our opponent's hand, and now we know that had we ashed the Airlifter earlier, we would have gotten heavily punished by our opponent using emergency. So that was a pretty good play to hold the Ash Blossom. Now our opponent's going to use emergency next. Using the Ash on the emergency here is the correct play, and that's what I end up doing. And we can see that our opponent's just going to pass turn from here. So unfortunately we draw a Dimension Shifter, but generally this type of hand is fine. And the way I'm going to play this out is I'm going to of course start by normal summoning Pydra, because I realistically only have 2 plays. 1 normal summon Pydra, or 2 normal summon Genroku. The reason I normal summon Pydra over Genroku, even though technically both would get me to a similar place, and we can see here that when I go to use Pydra, opponent does indeed have an infinite impermanence, and it allows me to use Droplet to send it away. Now, had I normal summoned Genroku instead, and let's say, for example, I went Battle Phase to play around a copy of Effect Veiler, it could have been the same result, but then now I'm opening myself up a lot harder to something like Ash Blossom by removing my own monster from the board. If I don't have a monster on board, I don't have a way to clear this Airlifter. That's going to be really bad for me. That free body's extra resources on the next turn, which I don't want to do. So I think that normal summoning the Pydra is just the correct play here. And now I'm going to resolve the Pydra and search a copy of Kaiman. And you're going to see here, I'm just going to go Battle Phase and use it. Unfortunately, our opponent has the Dominus Impulse, but in that situation, there was really no way for us to play around both of these cards with the hand that we had. So I think that overall, we did the best that we could with the hand that we had. So in general, I feel like this game was fairly well played by me, at least as well as you can play Tenpai. But I wanted to show this match because in the next game, I make a couple of different mistakes, and I want to go over those so you guys can sort of understand the thought process behind reviewing your own gameplay and seeing what you could have done better. So now getting into game 2, we did end up losing the first game because our opponent had a way to keep playing and we had no way to stop them. But in this game, I still once again made them go first. And here you can see I have a Meltarmi Fulos in my hand. And the first decision I have to make is, do I want to use this in the draw phase where I can play around a card like Talent? And in my head, I'm thinking I probably don't want to do that, because let's say, for example, I Fulos them before they commit a single card to the board. If they're sitting on a couple of interruptions, then they can simply pass turn over to me. And with just a single copy of Tundra, I won't be able to play through it and will probably lose on the next turn. So with this specific hand, I see that I'm going to need to at least draw 1 card off of Fulos just to give myself a better chance of playing through any potential non-engine that my opponent has. So I'm going to take the risk of playing into a card like Talents, since I feel like it's way more likely that he has multiple non-engine cards in his hand instead. Now, starting off the turn, our opponent's going to start off by activating Deception and then activating the hard draw on Hollowed Azamina. I'm not going to impulse this because, once again, I do need the draw off of Fulos, and if I just impulse this, I wouldn't be able to Fulos afterwards anyways, so fairly obvious play. Here, our opponent summons Mu Arcielago, and I draw into a Tundra. And now, at this point, I have a decision to make. I can choose to Infinite Impermanence this Mu Arcielago, because now I see that, okay, I should be able to play through a single copy of something like Infinite Impermanence, and I don't really necessarily need the additional draw. But once again, knowing what the Snake Eyes deck is capable of under a card like Fulos means that I know that regardless of what he adds, he's going to have to either commit super hard into this Fulos and give me more draws, or he's just going to end up simply adding something for follow-up and then using Hollowed Azamina to try to summon out the extra copy of Ilya Sylvia as a negate. So I think that it's okay to let this go through. Our opponent then is going to use the Hollowed Azamina to add itself back, and here's where I think I make a bit of a mistake. I ended up choosing to activate the Impulse here on the Hollowed Azamina, but in hindsight, I think that I should have just let this one go through, because I know for a fact he's summoning Ilya Sylvia, and if that's all he ends on, then we have an impermanence to trade with it anyways, so it would be the same result. But if he ends up committing harder into a card like IP Masquerena, which is likely what the Snake Eyes deck will do under a card like Fulos, then Super Polymerization is just going to win us the game. So I think that here, there was really no reason for me to stop this Hollowed Azamina. I think that knowing, 1, what Snake Eyes is capable of under Fulos, and 2, with this very specific hand, I should have thought about it a little bit more and actually let this one go through, because I don't think this Impulse really accomplished much. Now I ended up trading an Impulse for the Hollowed Azumina and losing out on one draw, as opposed to just using Imperm to trade on his next turn. So I think that this was definitely a mistake on my end, but regardless, our opponent's going to keep playing, activating the Wanted to grab Diabellstar, summoning itself out, using his effect. I choose not to Imperm this. Once again, I feel like there's nothing he can really do that's super threatening without having to give me a bunch of cards. And if he activates, let's say, Sinful Snake Eyes here and summons one from the deck, I'll get a draw, and then I can simply Imperm the monster that he summons. So I don't think there's a reason here for me to stop the Black Witch. May argue that it gives our opponent an extra piece of follow-up, but as the Tenpai player, my goal is always just to OTK them, so I don't really have to think too much about that. But of course, that's going to depend on what type of deck you're playing, and sometimes it will be worth using Imperm on this to stop them from getting follow-up in case you're not able to kill them. But anyways, our opponent's just going to get a draw here, and then from here, they're just going to summon out the Rescue Ace Preventer, link off the two monsters into an SP Little Knight to have one form of interaction on our turn, giving us another draw, bringing back the Hydrant. I choose to Imperm the Hydrant on summon. In my head, I was thinking, okay, if he has a card like Emergency, then I should do it on summon. Otherwise, he's going to be able to chain the Emergency and tribute it on Resolution and dodge the Imperm. But if I stop to think about it for just an extra second, if he has Emergency here, he can simply let this Imperm resolve, activate Emergency, and just summon out another copy of Hydrant and use this effect, and it'd be the same result for him. I feel like I should have just held this Imperm and let this Hydrant go, because now, as you can see, I get punished with the normal summon of Hydrant, and now I'm sort of forced to use my Ash Blossom on this for no reason. Whereas if I just let the first Hydrant go, this Hydrant would have stayed in his hand, and I would have been able to still have Imperm and Ash Blossom to deal with whatever he starts off the Hydrant. So in this case, it is enough to end our opponent's turn, and you're going to see it's not going to end up mattering because our hand was already good enough, but I think that these small decisions can ultimately end up haunting you. So you're going to see it's not really going to end up mattering here because a single copy of Chandra is going to end up cracking his entire board and OTKing him. So I feel like even though I didn't get punished for it here, it was only because my hand was strong enough to where I simply kept drawing the right cards to stop my opponent, and I was just never really in danger of losing this game. So I feel like those types of games can make you a little bit sloppy if you think, oh, I just have enough ways to stop my opponent regardless of how I play them. I don't think that's a good mindset to get into because in the future, there are going to be times where you're going to get punished for that if you don't use your hand traps optimally and really think through the timing of when you use those hand traps. So that's what I wanted to talk about in this game. And in game 3, you'll see that even though it was a pretty one-sided game, there's still a few things I wanted to talk about that I felt like were important. So getting into game 3, here my hand is really bad. I only have hand traps, so I'm going to need these Molcharmi cards to help me draw cards in C Engine. Otherwise, I'm just not going to be able to play. I did forget to mention that our opponent did force us to go first, so we don't really have a play except just pass it over our opponent and then use Molcharmi Purulia during the draw phase. I don't think it's worth waiting for the main phase because the first thing he can do is normal summon and we'll just get hard punished by that. So we kind of just have to shotgun this right away and hope he at least gives us one draw. So here we're going to see our opponent activate Thrust right away, and that's a little unfortunate for us. We don't have a way to stop it, but I still feel like we had to do the Purulia play in standby phase. 1, it'll play around a card like Talents, and 2, it plays around him just starting off his main phase with a normal summon. So unfortunately, we are going to have to eat the Threatening Roar, and our opponent just simply passes it back to us. And at this point, we end up drawing Shifter, which is of course really bad because we can't play. So there's not much we can really do in this turn except for just pass it back to our opponent. Here I choose not to shotgun the Fulos because once again I need these draws to resolve. So I need to guarantee myself at least one draw, and I can sort of risk him having a triple tactics Talents because we don't really have any good cards from him to rip regardless. And if he has it, then there's nothing we can really do because once again I think it's way too important for us to actually be able to draw 1 or 2 cards to C Engine. So opponent's going to start things off with the Reinforcement of the Army, grabbing Airlifter. We don't really have anything we can do to stop that, so our opponent's going to use Airlifter, search Emergency. And then from here, he's going to activate the Wanted, searching Black Witch. He's going to special summon out the Black Witch. And then from here, for some reason, I don't know why I did Fulos. I don't think it makes too much sense because now our opponent can just chain Emergency and then special summon one from the deck. And I will miss out on the draw with Fulos. So I don't really recall why I did this play. It's definitely just a misplay, but I can't remember if I had any actual reasoning for wanting to do this early. Small things like this are things you catch when you go back to watch your games, and you could think to yourself, oh, is there a reason why I made that play, or was it just me not really thinking it through? And I think in this case, it was just simply a misplay. There's no reason for me to do anything here. It's not like he's gonna link away these 2 monsters with something random. It doesn't really make sense for him to, so I don't think I gain anything from using the Fulos early. Our opponent is going to just activate the Emergency next. And now I'm in a bit of a pickle because I kind of want to stop this, but at the same time I really need that draw in order to see engine. But if I think about what they can do with just a single copy of Emergency, they can simply summon out a Rescue Ace Turbulence. I'll get a single draw off the Fulos, and then they can just simply set a bunch of back row, and I won't be able to play through it with whatever my 2 top decks are. So I think that now I kind of have to stop this and hope that somehow the rest of his hand, aside from the Threatening Roar, just doesn't do anything, and I'm able to draw an engine piece off the top. So I think that's the reason why I end up using the Dominus Impulse here. I think either way, I'm still in a very bad position, but I think that at least this way, it gives me a slim margin to win. Because I know at this point in my deck, I don't have access to mass board clears like Harpy's Feather Duster or Lightning Storm. So that means that even if I get the extra draw, I don't think there's anything that can really help me against the Rescue Ace Turbulence. I felt compelled to stop this because at least now if I draw a single starter, maybe there's a slim hope that somehow all these cards in his hand are dead and he only has a Threatening Roar. And I think in these situations where you're pretty far behind, you have to take these kinds of risks and just sort of hope your opponent doesn't have anything, because that's all you can really do. I think in this case, I kind of just had to hope my opponent had nothing else and hope that I could draw a starter off the top, so I choose to stop it. Now our opponent's going to activate the Deception and use the effect of the Sinful Spoil Snake Eyes, so he's going to commit a little bit into it, giving us an extra draw into a droplet, which might be able to help if we see an engine card, but once again, we are still really far behind, and at this point, we don't really have anything else that can stop our opponent, and now he's just going to be able to use the Hydrant to grab a copy of Turbulence, use the effect of the Deception to grab Hollowed, and then save it for next turn, plus use the Turbulence to just go ahead and set a bunch of cards to the field. And I think at this point, I know the game is over, because no matter what we draw, we aren't going to be able to break through a single copy of the trap card. We do end up losing this game, but I did want to go over a few small things, especially that time where I had to choose between either letting my opponent special one from deck or using Dominus Impulse to try to stop them and cut them off. So hopefully you guys found this section useful. I know I yapped for a long time, but it's super important to be very aware of your own mistakes and to sort of understand that yes, you are going to make these mistakes from time to time, no matter how experienced you are at the game. The only way you're going to improve is by going over these games and picking out these small mistakes so you don't make them in the future. And with that, that's going to wrap up this section. Before I wrap up the video, I just want to give a quick shout out to CardTrader Zero and Your Playmat. If you're looking for card supplies in general, then be sure to check out Your Playmat using my affiliate link in the description below. Or if you're looking for singles, check out CardTrader using my affiliate link in the description below as well. You'll not only be helping to support the channel, but you also get a nice discount on the things you'd already be buying anyways. And with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. If you have any tips for players, whether they're new or more experienced, let me know in the comment section below. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.